So I feel like I've had a lot of those moments, but there's one that comes to mind that's probably the last time I really had that moment. And it was probably, in a way, the biggest of all of them. And funnily enough, it was actually in a restaurant in Boston. At the time, it felt like my farewell tour, I'll call it. And something inside of me was like, we're done. We have done every single thing that we could possibly think of to make this work in the way that you've been told it has to work, for people to back you, want to invest in you, and see that you have worth. And you just can't tell that story. And it's been 6 years and you have nowhere to go. And I remember sitting in this restaurant with two of my closest friends at that point who I felt incredibly safe with, which is why I was over the other side of the world in the middle of my processing of feeling like it was time to let this go. And I just wept I remember this grief that I had. It was so public, like we were literally in this restaurant. But fortunately, they're both kind of counselors and psychologists. So they're used to and practiced sitting around people with big feelings and knowing the importance of just letting it flow when it's time to flow. And I had this incredible grief that I describe it like everyone had said when I had my business, which I also could call like a baby. This is the baby that is the perfect baby, and this is what you're going for, and this is what you want. It sleeps and it does this, and this is what everyone's looking for, and everyone asks you about it every time you see them, and it's just push for it to look like this. And I tried to make it look like that with everything I had, and no matter what I did, it wasn't enough, and I didn't know what enough was. And in that moment, I was broken. And I had this deep sense of I wasn't enough, and it wasn't enough, and I was at the end. And as I moved through that grief and I just let it flow, there was a moment in time as I sat with people who were experienced and practiced, who just sat with me in the pain and didn't try to take it away, where there was this moment where there was this like shift that happened in my consciousness nearly, where, I don't know, they just helped me see that, sure, I didn't have that baby, the perfect one, the one that it's meant to look like, but maybe I had another baby, and maybe it was the baby that I was meant to have, and maybe it was beautiful in its own right. And that was the start of my process of accepting what was in front of me and what I did have, and actually discovering that it was more than enough. And that it was all about me really coming to understand within myself what enough was. And the grief that I have now about what happened in that first 6 years of my startup was about how I talked to myself and treated myself, and some of the things that I did to myself and other people around me, because I didn't know that I was enough. And I always was, and it was always there. But what was driving me was to try and prove it. But you can't prove something that just is. You actually just have to accept it. And yeah, my advice is to really go and figure out who you are and what your enough is. And you decide that. Like, in the culture of startup, there is never enough. And I see it on people who have won. Like, they hit their enough, and then the game changed because it wasn't enough anymore, because that was too easy. Or like the drive is in the keeping on going, and it's fun when you hit it. It's like a drug. Don't get me wrong, I had some of my highest highs, but also some of my lowest lows. It was like chaos. But when I decided that I get to decide if I have worth. And I just do. And it's not attached to how successful my startup is going. At the core of what I believe sits for a lot of entrepreneurs and founders, and I say this because it was true to me, is that we actually have our worth in that business. And the lengths we'll go for that are just not even human. Like, some of what you do as a founder, it's not healthy and it's not human, and we need to ask why that is such a big deal. And it's because it represents something. And often it's our worth. And that right there will never end well. You've got to have a sense of worth that is not dictated by anything external. And if you can go on the journey of figuring out that your value does not lie in how many staff you have, how much you raised, what your metrics are, what your engagement is, whether you made more money or like how you still need all those things to have a successful business. Those things are still real. I'm not saying that they're not important. I'm saying that does not define your worth.